I've just clicked it.
Okay, just share your screen and start.
Good morning, those of you who are joining. Apologies for the almost exactly on time start. It's been, we've had a few interesting technology challenges this morning with Zoom and passwords and other things. Julian, can I just get double check that you are ready to run the polls, even though I'm the host?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Can you run the polls even though I'm
Yes.
the host? Okay.
That's good. No, actually, I don't have the button. Can you make me a host again after sharing the screen like we always do? Thank you.
Okay. I'll just get my right deck here. Sorry, guys, I'm just trying to get the right webinar details. I mean, the right slide deck. 1 second. I think it's that one. No, it's not that one. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the delay. I'm just ensuring I've got way too many slide decks open and I'm just getting the right one up for you. We've had a few technical challenges this morning as well. And where are you? There we go. Share and all right. And then Julian, I need to make you the host.
Yeah.
Can you remind me how I make you the host?
So you just go in the participants pane panel and next to my name.
Julian. It doesn't allow me to make you the host.
I don't know because I'm not there, unfortunately. Maybe you'll just start the polls. Do you have the polls button?
I do, yeah. Okay, I can do the polls. All right, great. All right, let's get going. Good morning, everybody. This webinar, it was advertised.
Let's give everyone a couple of minutes to arrive. I see that the participants still low. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Julian.
No matter what, hi everyone. Right, so thank you very much for being here.
We're about 5 past, I think. In 1 minute, we're 5 past. So we'll get going in honor of those who are here. So if you don't mind, as we go through the presentation, for those of you who are dialed in, you're welcome to ask questions in the chat function. So I'm going to just say welcome here, everybody, in the chat function. Welcome here. So you see where it is. And welcome here. You will hear that, you'd read that there. And again, as we're going through, welcome to ask questions. We advertise these webinars for an hour. We always try and make them a bit shorter. than an hour. One of my first mentors in this business told me that people are never disappointed if you finished early, but they're typically always annoyed if you finished late. So one of the rules we try and follow. Okay, so Julian, I think I'm going to get going, right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so again, officially, good morning, everybody. The session today is about making culture and strategy eat breakfast together. I was having a chuckle with one of our clients. We work with Swarovski Crystal. Many of you probably know the company, and they use this actual expression. And we were running one of our programs in their organization that supports this very sentiment. So I'm getting for those of you, Shannon, chat's been disabled for us. We can only use the Q&A section. Wow, okay. All right, that's good. So just use the Q&A then. That's fine. I'm not sure why that's the case, but why it's been disabled. Oh gosh, it's an interesting morning technically for us. Oh, there you go. Sorry, I've now everyone. Okay, I think it's used. Shannon, would you mind quickly testing it for us? If you type something in, is it available now, the chat function? It is, great. Okay, super. Thank you, excellent, thank you. All right, great. It's amazing. We've been using Zoom for a long time and I'm still learning things about Zoom. Good morning, everybody. Okay, great. Thank you so much for the good mornings as well on the chat function. This is the weirdest experience presenting webinars to a blank screen and seeing lots of people. You know people are there, but you have no idea who's there. So thank you. Morning, Edwina, Emily, Linda, Natalie, and Peter. Thank you for joining us from Adelaide. Hey, Karine. Okay, I'll stop there and get going. Apologies for the strange start. So making culture and strategy eat breakfast together is the subject of today's webinar. I'm not going to do introductions as Julian has advised me. Most of you already know me. If you don't, that's a quick introduction. But apparently most people in this webinar will have attended a webinar once before, the kind of clients we work with. What are we going to cover today? Very briefly, we're going to look at the what and why of organizational team cultures, organization stroke team. And we think of them as culture and organizations, culture and team. Usually when we're talking about them, we're talking about the same thing. So if we're addressing culture in a team or we're addressing a whole organizational culture, the principles tend to stay the same. There's a few additional things you need to do at organizational level, of course, but they're very, very similar. Then we're going to look at the core elements of an unhealthy organizational team culture, and many of you probably recognize this. What's the cost of an unhealthy organizational team culture? Where to look to improve culture? And then lastly, what is vertical growth, right? So what vertical growth is and why it's the obvious next big thing for leadership and culture improvement. And I was on 2 phone calls this morning, one with the CEO of one of our clients and another with a long-standing one of our clients, and both were saying it's so interesting that leadership and culture is an intellectually simple challenge. We all kind of know what we should do, but often, or more often than not, we don't actually execute particularly well on the obvious. So for example, we all know that we want to work in a culture that's honest, and we want to have honesty given to us. We want to be able to feel we can be honest. So simple intellectually, actually usually poorly executed by most organizations. Why is that the case? We'll have a brief look at that today as well. And that's the whole subject of vertical growth. For those of you who have dialed in, we have a small gift. You're welcome to download the executive summary of the new book. So the new book's my new book's coming out on the 28th of September. We'll give you a pre-order link as well. Probably my favorite thing about this book, apart from the subject vertical growth, which we think is a really crucial subject that all leaders, organizational development, coaches, etc., should understand. It's also really amazing because it's got 26 leaders, real leaders that we featured and told their stories in this book. And I'll never forget our publisher, our chief editor, would regularly express shock to me that people had signed off on allowing these stories to be told because they're so authentic and vulnerable and real, and people talking about their dysfunctional fears and so forth. So it's a very rich book around understanding the journey of what people are actually going through internally and how to work with themselves in the context of scaled culture change. So more intro. So just let's start with the core principle here, that what is culture for? Like, what's culture supposed to do? What's its purpose, if you will, or what's the purpose of looking after culture or doing something about culture? And often culture is thought of as HR's kind of responsibility, like finance, for example, is the finance division's responsibility. But we all know, for example, with finance, that actually finances are everyone's responsibility. And it's the same with culture. So then the question really is what is culture for? And the way we are viewing it nowadays, it sounds so simple, but interestingly enough, it's only the last few years we began to describe it with this clarity, is that every organization has a vision, they have a strategy, and then they have this part, the daily execution on that strategy. And now in our VUCA world, the ability to adapt and disrupt, and what we're calling broadly agility. So the ability to execute on a strategy, the ability to adapt and be agile around a strategy is either, and this is the image, you'll see the windsock here image is just indicating wind. You're either doing that flying into headwinds or flying with a tailwind. And a culture really is that tailwind or the headwind to your ability to sustainably execute on your strategy and vision and to be agile. And so much so now that when we work with new clients, and you get typically when we're working with a CEO and they have the rollout, like the CEO roadshow, you know, that we're going to talk about the new vision and the new strategy. It's very rare that roadshow includes culture or includes the connection between culture, strategy, and vision. Whereas we insist now with our clients when they're working with us is that the CEO and the executive team should be talking about vision, strategy, execution, and culture as one thing, because your culture effectively enables your ability to execute or disables your ability to execute. And it's why we think culture and strategy should eat breakfast together. We got, often people say, well, culture eats strategy for breakfast, but really culture is supposed to support and help you execute on strategy. And so when we work with clients, we often ask really simple, stupid questions. We're working with a new hotel organization recently, and we ask them, what are 2 or 3 behaviors that disable your ability to successfully, quickly, efficiently execute on your strategy or execute on your customer service? And what are 2 or 3 behaviors that really support you to execute? And that gets us clarity on what culture is for. What are the top 3 culture challenges most organizations face? Again, there's myriad of challenges we've seen over the years, and this is year 20 for us doing proper scaled culture change work. And I would say that the number one thing we see in organizations that's dysfunctional is dishonesty and triangulation. And dishonesty is a big subject. We know that honesty is the number one most treasured value of leaders around the world. It's mostly dishonesty by omission. So, not telling the truth about things or not announcing things in time. Triangulation is another point. Conflict avoidance. There's a whole range of aspects of dishonesty. We would oftenly joke with our clients saying the measures that people will go to avoid one simple honest conversation continues to astonish us, but it creates enormous difficulties in culture. Primarily, there's such a drive for psychological safety. It's technically impossible to be psychologically safe in a culture where you don't trust you're being told the truth, or you don't trust your teammates are telling the truth. It's just technically impossible. Followed closely by and related to is poor levels of accountability. And what we mean mostly by accountability culturally is accountability for good behavior, accountability for behavior that supports a great culture, which supports healthy, sustainable execution, attraction of great staff, getting the best out of them. And then lastly, a lack of genuine care. And that lack of care expresses itself in either overworked demands on people and ignoring their health, right through to lack of appreciation for great work or extra effort. People don't feel that they're seen, appreciated, matter. And that's 3 biggest challenges we see. Our work tends to focus mostly on the first 2. When we start, the last one comes, we think, once you've got the first 2 right, because the problem again is if you have lots of care, but you still got the dishonesty, triangulation, and lack of accountability in place, it's not really going to actually it's kind of like that's the dessert. It's not the main meal. A main meal is dishonesty and accountability, or honesty and accountability is the way we see it. And again, you're welcome to ask any questions or make comments. Julian will keep an eye on. Julian is my co-founder of this business, and he's more technically oriented than I am. Let me just come on to more technically oriented than I am, and I'm more content oriented than Julian is. Hence, I'm doing the presenting.
So we have a question. I don't know if you're covering that later in the webinar. What do you mean by triangulation?
Okay, thanks, Susan. Triangulation is a phenomenon that was first described in family systems therapy, where a guy by the name of Bowen in the 70s, they did a lot of research on what creates, supports, or are the patterns of dysfunctional families. Dysfunctional families, in other words, where there's typically some form of neglect or abuse, or the children aren't thriving, the marriages are struggling, what they call dysfunctional families. And what they found absolutely reliably was that every dysfunctional family is tainted by triangulation. What is triangulation? Triangulation is when, so, you know, I'll imagine, Susan, I'm speaking to you directly. Imagine we are work colleagues, and our relationship, we don't have the maturity to tell each other the truth, nor do we have the maturity to actually take accountability for our behavior. So, for example, if we're not getting along, neither of us ask the question, I wonder what, you know, for me, I might say, I wonder how I'm behaving towards Susan that's making it difficult for her to work with me. And you ask the same question. I wonder what I'm doing to Michael that's making it difficult to work. How can I change behavior? That's the accountability question. Most people in our experience will go into blame mindset. Now, if both are blaming, that's an immature mindset. And then they are not able to resolve that relationship particularly well or grow within the relationship. At that point, what usually happens is one of them seeks rescuing, or both, from someone else. And that typically in a leadership context is your manager. You escalate. I might say, let's say my manager's Mary. I say, Mary, I just can't get along with Susan. And she's just this, that, and that. And then you go to Mary and say, Michael, it's terrible. It's da, 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 da. And then Mary takes on the job of trying to fix both of us and both our relationships without involving us. She rescues us from the direct conversation. She rescues us from dealing with our own stuff and working and growing. So she tries to rescue it. That is triangulation. You've now got a triangled relationship. At its most basic form, triangulation is just plain out gossiping about other people and not having direct conversation. And at its most technical, it's what I've just talked about. It's this where you're trying to intervene in relationships to fix relationships without demanding maturity from the people. And in most organizations, we see, for example, the HR department is often the least trusted department in the organization because they've become subject to triangulation. They can't deal with their own anxiety around seeing relationships not working. And so they try and intervene in a way that's trying to fix and rescue everybody. And that then results in triangulation. And I've written extensively on this subject in our new book, because there's interesting shifting dynamics in triangulation. But every team we've ever worked with has some degree of triangulation in it. Every culture has triangulation in it, because how many of us are truly mature enough to have honest growth-based conversations absolutely regularly? So this is what we mean by triangulation. And you can see, thanks Susan, thanks for that feedback, how it's connected with dishonesty. One of the most famous sayings about triangulation is the road to hell is paved with good intentions, because often when a person's intervening, they've actually got good intentions, but they actually create more toxicity. And again, that's what they discovered in dysfunctional families too. Some of you may recognize this. Now, the consequences of these three key things is usually what we call image management, right? It leads to image management. And what is image management? It's described beautifully by Robert Keegan from Harvard. And I'll read it out. In an ordinary organization, most people are doing a second job no one is paying them for. Most people are spending time and energy covering up their weaknesses, managing other people's impressions of them, showing themselves to their best advantage, playing politics, hiding their inadequacies, hiding their uncertainties, and hiding their limitations. So in a nutshell, like, we've got two jobs, right? In most, especially in larger organizations, but even in middle, even small organizations, there's this one job of doing my actual work, and there's other, politics and so forth. How that typically shows up is this question here, and I'm going to launch the poll in a second, and you guys can quickly do it to give yourselves a sense of how the audience today sees this in theirs, in their lives. What percentage of time and energy in your organization, in your life, by the way, this is anonymous, so we're going to ask you to please be honest. What percentage of time and energy is wasted on being in unnecessary meetings, politics, hiding weaknesses, conversations after the conversations, pretending support's not needed, not speaking up to overwork demands, not challenging poor decisions at your organization? And you see there's the choice. So now I'm going to launch the poll. Hopefully I get this right. Launch. And we would really appreciate if you could, again, it's totally anonymous, can't see who votes what. So please be as honest as you like. What's the level of this in your organization? And I'll give you some of our, this is all adding to our database, by the way. We keep analyzing, and we've written about this in the new book too. Okay, so I'm going to give it 10 more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, closing. Okay, so what is the data telling us, right? So share results. I'm assuming everybody can see this now. Julian, just please, if I'm making wrong assumptions, just tell me. So we've got a band, right? So we've got 12% at this band, 21 to 30 is 23%, 31 to 40 is 17. Okay, good. So what you're seeing here in this data is actually not untypical of what we see in our clients. In fact, we just did yesterday, we did a fresh data crunch on what we're seeing, and the average is something like 40.23%. So what we're seeing in the average organization, if you average out people's experience in the organization, is similar to the trend we're seeing here, is that about 40% of people's time, energy is chewed up on image management, which if you thought about that as a business, not as often in our field, we're guilty of like just talking in HR language. But if you think about business, for example, if you've got two businesses, let's say two hotels, and one has no image management and the other has high, typical 40% image management, which organization is going to be more fun to work in, more innovative, better customer service, et cetera, et cetera? Obviously the one with less image management. And so it's a huge opportunity for businesses at the very minimum to become a ton more efficient in terms of reducing image management. And what is at the core? What is at the core of image management? So if we wanted to reduce image management and increase efficiency, stop sharing, just removing this poll. Okay, there's another one coming here. All right, just going to, so where do we begin? Like if we now, let's say in a perfect world, you've got this clear delineation between here's a vision, here's a strategy, here's the execution plans, KPIs and so forth, and here's the culture, the core behaviors that we need that enable us to execute on this really well. And here's some of the behaviors that we know happen in an organization that disable or slow us down. That's where the image management stuff belongs. And how do we increase more of the good stuff and address the bad stuff? And this has been our obsession for at least 15 years now. And we've kind of refined it down to, it starts with making sure that you understand, and there's a universal understanding of what is the purpose of the organizational values. For the vast majority of our clients, still to this day, we see that the organizational values are more a statement of pride of who we want to be. Look, we love integrity, we love diversity, it's like this kind of like brand, and then it's communicated as a brand. And then, of course, everyone's pretty much immediate experience is that there's a gap between the communicated pretty brand and the reality of what people experience in the organization. In fact, Kouzes and Posner research tells us that you're better off not publishing values in your organization unless you're actually prepared to really have a go at living them, because it just creates cynicism and disengagement. So a simple definition, and then I'm going to come to how do you, the beginning point is understanding that culture, right, or team values, organization team values are the behavior guidelines to ensure delivery on the vision and strategy in the most efficient and agile way possible, right, including be able to adapt to disruption. Now, there may be part of that where we need diversity, we need inclusion, we need we need that to attract and keep the best thinking, the best challenge, the best disruptive ability, and so forth. There's a whole range of business cases for diversity and inclusion as well, and that should feature into the execution of the strategy, right, and vision. But again, what we see in most of our clients is a complete disconnect between the pretty value statements and the reality of what they're trying to achieve. So we start there. Once you've got that clear, we look at the 3 R's. So there are many ways to look at culture and to leverage culture. We decided to keep this. If you're wondering what that image is there, that funny global ball, that is a Swarovski crystal world ball. So we actually took this from one of the decks I was doing, the Swarovski. I just love the image, but side note, apologies. When we look at how do we get our culture right, and how do we get it aligned with where we want to go, and we think there's 3 core things, the big rocks, if you will, of culture. First is role modeling of leadership. Second is rituals, and third is rewards and accountability. I'm going to focus a little bit on the role modeling of leadership in a minute. Let me just talk about rituals. Rituals are fascinating because rituals culturally, whatever a culture ritualizes, is what it values as a general rule. So for example, if you're in a family context, if you all sit down together at dinner once a day and turn all devices off, you've got a ritual in place that points to a value underneath the ritual. And it might be connecting together as a family, right? Making sure we're hearing each other and we fostering connection. And that ritual of having dinner together without devices supports an underlying value, for example, of connection. The same with organizations where you see there's a lot of rituals around finances, for example. There's reporting, there's operational meetings, there's budget planning. There's a lot of markers and rituals that happen in an organization around money and finances. How many rituals occur around culture and values and leadership in an organization? And what we find is usually very few. In fact, at the base minimum, what we usually see is in the 6 monthly or annual performance review, where companies proudly announce that they value culture or values of 50% of a person's performance. The reality is that the performance is actually 99%. And then as long as they're not abusing anyone or breaking basic rules, then culture is basically an afterthought, or values are an afterthought, where they'll sit there and they go, you perform really well. Oh, how did you go on the values? Oh yeah, I thought you did well. It's like an afterthought. It's not ritualized into the organization. So that's a key leverage point if we want to build the culture or sustain the values in the organization. And then rewards and accountability, an obvious one, where and most organizations we work with, their rewards and accountability systems, funnily enough, are directly in opposition for the actual values of the organization. So when we want to get the values aligned to support vision and strategy, these are the 3 places we look. But role modeling of leadership happens to also be the most important one of them all. It turns out that 40% of a person's engagement at work can be explained by their boss's behavior. And the way we measure 7 areas of leadership. That's what our research tells us. And in order for us to feel trusting of our leaders need to, at the very minimum, walk the organizational values talk, right? And in order to do that, they need to have some cognizance of what their walk is. Now, what we usually do in our programs is we help them understand their walk and then connect. And there's a whole bunch of reasons on this in adult development. You don't ever want to live someone else's values. That's not actually conducive to growth. You want to live your values, and then you want to feel that in the living of your values, you can support the organizational values. Again, we don't have time to go into all of that detail, but that's a really important point. So we know that leadership, role modeling, starts with walking the talk, right? And that means knowing what values you stand for and then walking it, right? That's that people can trust you. That's Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner in the picture. Fascinatingly enough, I'm getting ahead of myself before I get to the next point. How much difference does this make, this clarity of having a talk to walk? 66% difference, right? This is what this data says. People who rated the leaders as always clear about their leadership philosophy, about what they stand for, indicated trusting them over 66% more than those who said their leaders are almost never clear about that walk the talk. So hopefully you're seeing this, what we have is this passion for logical alignment of everything when we're doing culture work, right? So that if I'm a leader and I'm trying to walk my talk, I can explain how that's connected with the culture, the vision, the strategy, execution. I can see my own work within the bigger context and how my work makes a contribution to the bigger context. Now, fascinatingly enough, this is what I wanted to say a minute ago, is it's our experience that it's extremely rare to meet people who know the talk they're trying to walk, which is kind of astonishingly crazy. It's stupid. It's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? What's the talk I'm trying to walk? Well, look, if you're going to walk the talk as a leader or a human being, you have to have a clear talk to walk. Like, it's not rocket science, right? But interestingly enough, not so done so well. And I want to take a quick poll from you guys to get your view on this, right? We have these 3 acid test questions we ask leaders, right? Around this simple walk the talk question. The first question is, what's your talk you walk as a leader? So what's your inner code? 2, when did you last fail at walking your talk? Describe what happened. And ideally needs to be in the last week or 2. And then when did you last overcome fear in order to walk your talk or live your code, right? So what percentage of leaders do you think, hey, where are you, Paul? What percentage of leaders do you think can answer this question within 5 minutes? Even think about your own as it needs to be quick, right? So launch. Let's take a quick, okay, the poll's live. What percentage of leaders do you think can answer all 3 questions within 5 minutes? Okay. Yeah. All right. I'll end the poll in 10 seconds. We went down a long poll. We got a good response rate. 11 to 20, 0 to 10, 21 to 30. Okay. It seems 8, was it 50, 77% are 20% and below in the votes. Okay, I'm going to pause it there. Thanks. That's really useful insight, right? Now I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you, just so you can see that's what I'm seeing as you guys have voted. So we've got the vast majority of our 0 to 20. Now, interestingly enough, the reality. Oh, Veronica, may I ask if this work? Yes, this is all covered in the book. Yes, Veronica, this is covered in detail with case studies and stories of failure around walking the talk. In this, everything we're covering in this webinar is covered in the book in way more detail. I'm going to stop sharing. So your votes are, by the way, relatively generous, right? Thanks, Veronica. Relatively generous, because our experience is actually, it's a lot lower than, well, I know we only gave you 0 to 10, but our experience is it's about 1% of leaders. In fact, just last week, I was working with a leader who could answer this question, these 3 questions. And I still remember, I think it's the first time this year that I've met a leader that can answer all 3 questions. And I've been working with a lot of leaders this year. And I remember sort of feeling like almost in a state of shock that they could answer these 3 questions quite fluently. And again, it still leaves me, and hopefully as you're hearing me speak now, it should leave us all in a bit of shock. It's like, we don't do the most basic thing well in leadership, even of your votes, right? The vote, 77%, I think, of you were from 20% and below. So that means even if my experience is a distorted one, because my experience is it's less than 1%, is, okay, 20% or less of leaders actually have a living walk the talk, which is astonishingly low, given it's the most basic thing in leadership, right? So in our own journey of trying to understand this, I need to keep an eye on time. In our own journey of trying to understand, like, why is this the case, right? Why is it that, and I often ask leaders this question too, and maybe to make it a little bit more interactive, maybe you could have a venture. Like, why do you think that the stats are that low? Like, how do you explain that? Like, what was your working theory be? Please share in the chat function. Like, what would your working theory be around like why this is so low? Like, how would you explain that? How do you explain that when we do webinars? When we do live talks, live conference talks, and we get people to turn to each other, we catch them by surprise. Describe your talk to the person that you're next to you. What's your talk? You're trying to walk, and like the room goes quiet. It's like, why is that the case? Okay, so Melinda, you say it's a lack of self-knowledge. David, yes, it's a lack of self-knowledge. Oh, Susan, will you ask where we think we sit? I'm not going to ask, if we were in a live audience, maybe. I think it's a fun question. You've got to really watch yourself, though, because a lot of us try and answer this question from image management. So often what we see leaders processing this. Like, you can almost like see the wheels turning in their mind. What's the talk I try and walk? What's the, and then the fundamental question when they're about to go into the exercise is, how the hell can I image manage my way through this? How can I make sure I don't look like an idiot? And I look like I look a no, and then they're trying to invent the talk. The second two questions usually kill it. So sometimes, I'll just go back on my slide. Sometimes people can get away with the first question in 5 minutes and kind of sort of make it up, but then they fail at questions 2 and 3. And we've got very specific ways of telling. We have 6 criteria that we run through in our heads, and sometimes we teach clients of how to know if someone's telling an authentic story or they're not. It's an image management story. There's telltale markers, and virtually everyone fails at 2 and 3. Because then they've kind of done it on a course once upon a time when they've got their leadership brand, but there's nothing to do with the reality of their experience every day. So I'll just read a couple. It's hard. It requires persistence. It is hard. We want to be better than we actually are. Yeah. Vulnerability can be hard to demonstrate. Arrogance. Yeah, that's true, Jennifer. They actually believe they do it. There's no shortage of delusion in the corporate world. That's for sure. Too much focus on. Yes. Too much focus on what others think. Correct. Good. And you guys are getting stuck in the ways. Yeah, we do. These, hopefully what I'm about to share with you actually matches what you guys have said now, actually, and provides you a framework of interest. Over the years, we're constantly astonished. Hopefully you are too, when you go less than 1%. It's like, why is that the case? And the best thing we've come across that explains this is adult development theory. Now, adult development theory started off in the 70s, I think, with several different Harvard-related professors doing this research. And the question they were asking is, we know that children have milestones of growth, like, oh yes, that's what a 2-year-old's supposed to do, and a 3-year-old, and oh yes, they're starting to talk now and walk now, and now they're starting to get social awareness. There's like a natural stage of growth. But until the 70s or 80s, there was an idea that once you kind of hit 21 or 22 or something, like you didn't have any more developmental milestones. You were now an adult. And then this question was asked, well, do adults have development milestones? And can you tell if one adult's more mature than the other? And how do you tell? Like, what makes one person more mature or more developed than another person? And it has an interesting relationship with this question of walk the talk. So let me quickly walk you through that. So, and it's kind of mixes childhood and adulthood here, but the first stage of maturity or growth, it's actually reflex mind, but we don't bother describing that. The one we start describing is what's called impulsive mind, right? And impulsive mind is, let's grab something here behind, so I just need to use a prop, just 1 second. Impulsive mind is where I have no say or control over my impulses, right? So it's quite a basic level of maturity, although we all at times experience this impulsive mind. Have you ever sort of sworn to yourself, I'm not going to eat any candy today, and then someone puts candy in front of you, or lollies in Australia, and next thing you know, you're eating them? That is impulsive mind. You've been consumed, taken over by your impulsive mind. It's like you had no agency or control over your impulses to eat candy. Right? That's a quite basic development stage. The second stage of development that we've all been through typically is we go from impulsive mind to self-centered mind. I'm going to run through, by the way, I'm running through adult development theory extremely quickly. I could take 3 hours on the subject. So forgive me and ask questions if I'm losing you, right? Remember, the context is, why do so few leaders walk the talk, all right? That's what we're trying to answer. So self-centered mind is when I now can overcome my impulses, right? So you see the header in the middle there, what they can see and consciously overcome, right? So at the self-centered mind, it would be like if I put the candy on the person's hand at impulsive mind stage, they would just eat it, they can't control. If I said to them, wait 30 seconds and I will give you a second candy, if you're all seeing me, I'm showing you on the video here, I'll give you a second candy, they can see the impulse and overcome it. They're not ruled by it, wait the 30 seconds and then get the second candy. They are a more mature, more evolved stage than impulsive mind because they have more choices basically than impulsive mind, right? They have more ability, more agency over themselves. And at the self-centered stage, they're ruled by their own desires, right? So they can manage impulses, but they can't overcome their own self-centeredness, their own self-desire. Now, astonishingly, research indicates that 15% of the adult population is still at self-centered mind. Self-centered mind at its worst is like dog eat dog world. It's like those, you know, when you see the gangster movies where it's kind of like, it's just winner takes all. There's no, it's just, I win, I want to be the top dog, and that's that, right? And there's codes, but it's quite a hard world. Now in corporations, we see this sometimes in leaders as well. It's where you get the narcissistic, psychopathic kind of leader. It's just all about themselves, and then manipulative and so forth, and they lie and they don't worry about lying and so forth. Fortunately, it's not the vast majority of the population. The vast majority of the population, and where the challenge really lies, is the next stage. Socialized mind. Socialized mind is when, and oops, sorry, I touched something, my mistake there. Socialized mind is when, are you guys seeing the slide deck again? Can I just get a quick check? Anyone just put in the chat function? Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. I touched the escape button, my mistake. At socialized mind, what's happening is that I can now overcome my self-centeredness. So if I had the two candies on my hand, and again, this is an extremely simplistic way of explaining this, by the way. So for those of you who do understand adult development, please forgive me. I'm just trying to make this easy and accessible initially to understand. Is if Julian, for example, let's say Julian and I know each other well, and I know Julian loves candy too, is that I have this ability now to go, I wonder if Julian wants one of my candies or my lollies, and I go, hey Julian, you want one? And he does. At that point, I'm able to overcome my own self-centered desires, right? My own self-centeredness, and I'm able to empathize, connect, socialize, be a functional part of a group, which is really great. It's an evolution of self-centeredness. However, what am I ruled by at this stage of development, right? Like, the good stuff is I can overcome my self-centeredness. The challenging stuff is I'm still driven by the need for external validation. Now, what do we mean by external validation? It means that I just lovely example, a really the most simple example I've ever heard, actually, just a couple of days ago. I've just come out of a 6-day meditation training, and which I do these regularly. And our teacher was talking about, Patrick, my friend and teacher, was talking about about meditation posture, like how you should sit straight, how, you know, what's good for the back and so forth. And he said, then he doesn't know adult development theory. He said, now there's two ways of thinking about your posture. One way is you kind of get yourself all set up and you get straight, and then you think to yourself, I wonder if the people around me think I look like a good meditator. I'm like look good straight. At that point, you're caught by the need for external validation. Your orientation towards your sense of worth, your sense of what makes life worthwhile, is about how others see you, and that's either as a nice person, or as an expert meditator, or an author of books that knows stuff, or a senior manager, or, you know, live in a nice place, or whatever it is. But the mind is oriented towards how others see me as a core value foundation, right? And then Patrick said, but a wiser way to set up your meditation posture is it doesn't matter what other people, it's about, are you internally balanced inside yourself? Do you feel a sense of still balance? Now, it might not look the best to anyone else, but that's irrelevant. You're constructing your posture from the inside out, not from the outside in. And that is the price of external validation. It's constantly on your mind, your reputation, what people think of you, whether they like you, whether you're the most expert in the room, whether you're looking smart, and so forth and so forth. It's our experience that the vast majority of the rest of the population is that socialized mind. Now, what's fascinating is that socialized mind does values exactly like we see in most organizations. So if I had to ask you guys, imagine if you had socialized mind and your primary sense of safety and self-worth comes from how others see you, and then you're invited to live a simple value like honesty. And honesty brings into risk external validation. So if I'm honest, I may not be seen as an expert. If I admit I don't know, for example, I might not look so good. Or if I reach out for help, maybe people will think I'm incompetent. Or, if I challenge bad behavior, maybe people won't like me. Or if I tell that person the truth about their performance, maybe they won't want to be around me, and so forth. That's all external validation needs. If I am going to now practice honesty and it risks external validation consistently, will I practice honesty sustainably, right? So I'm seeing yeses. I'm assuming that's yes to the previous question, 1141. Yeah. So if I had to ask you, is it possible to sustainably and consistently practice a value like honesty if you're primarily driven by the need for external validation? What do you guys think? No. Yeah. No, absolutely not. Right. This is interesting, right? But is it true that you would still be honest to a degree and quite regularly? Probably yes. Why? Because that's what the social norm is. And what's challenging about being a socialized mind is that you can't really outgrow your environment because you are defined by your environment, or you're rebelling against your environment. There's no internal reference point, right? And this is what explains why, if there's so many people at socialized mind, why nobody's walking the talk, or why nobody's got to talk to walk, because there's a lack of ability to internally define what my life's about. Our life becomes, as my 24-year-old son's discovering in his own psychology, he's like, Dad, why is it that the vast majority of my decision-making has this kind of echo of what will my dad think, what will my mom think, what will others think if I get this job or I don't have enough. There's this constant orientation. And it's like, yeah, that's socialized mind. You're in socialized mind. Socialized mind is a kind of torture if you know the alternative. And unfortunately, most of the population's in this. There's this research study that was done by Sean Acor from Harvard, another Harvard professor in psychology. And his research, he studied happiness for 12 years. And his research concluded that in reality, if I knew everything about your external world, I can only predict 10% of your long-term happiness. 90% of long-term happiness is predicted by how your brain processes the world. At socialized mind, going back here, there's really little cognizance of how you're processing, how you're thinking, how you're showing up. There's very little. And if there is cognizance of it, it's always contexted. And how will this look? Oh, I need to be kinder. Why? Because then I'll get more external validation. I need to be tougher. Why? Because then I'll get more external validation. There's not a deep relationship with an internal set of values, which is why you see such a fraught, inconsistent relationship with organizational values, because there's just a lack of understanding of what values are for in the first place. Catherine, there's a lot of psych in grad. I'm not sure what you mean, but I'm happy to, if you want to give me another way of explaining that. Psychology, there is, yeah. Psychology in grad, yes. Yes, and yet, agreed. And yet, it's so basic. This, right? It's being able to notice what's going on internally, manage what's going on internally, and you've answered. This is the key question to evolve. You've answered. Basically, you've realized the truth of this research study, because you've become to understand, which is such a pivotal moment when you really start defining a talk and walking the talk. Is when we begin to actually believe what you're reading here. Because if you had to have looked at your last hour before this webinar of your thoughts, if we had to have recorded all your thoughts, right? And then we played them back to you, how many of those thoughts would have been oriented around, I wonder how I can train my mind this morning and to be more serene in itself. I wonder how I can train my mind to be more congruent with my deeper values? What was your thinking? What you'll find, what we found in our experience, is the vast majority of thinking is oriented towards how can I secure the environment? How can I get my plans done? How can I make sure this person that it's all out there, the thinking. It's not very much self-reflection. And that's the next stage when I realized, you know what, it's way more important what's going on internally. Whether I achieve my doesn't change what's going on internally to me. And it's a false positive that if it does, it doesn't actually. So I begin to develop what we call the next stage, which is the self-examined mind, right? This is ability to examine ourselves. And at that point, I can overcome the need for external validation. And this is where you finally get the promise of the walk the talk, because this is where the leader begins to understand, oh, when I'm living honestly, when I'm speaking the truth, even at the risk of external validation, I find my internal experience at the end of a day is far more congruent. I find my body is more at ease. We often ask our clients, a day out of integrity, how does it feel? What's a day out of integrity feel like? And what does a day in integrity feel like? And they all get it, right? It's like a day out of integrity is dissonant. It's kind of uncomfortable. And a day in integrity is congruent. It's like at peace. Great. And then they begin to look further and they see they're out of integrity. But how come I'm not feeling that dissonance? And the answer is because you're too numb. The average person is so unself-aware and so numb, illustrated by the question when we ask people, hey, how do you practice self-awareness? And no one can answer that question, interestingly enough. And I mean, when I say no one, I'm not over-exaggerating. Maybe 0.001% of people can answer the question, how do you practice self-awareness? We do this regularly. People don't actually know how. And so this is the promise, and this explains why we have so few people who are able to state the talk they're trying to walk, who are able to actually monitor their behavior in the context of that, and monitor where they fail and succeed, the humility to acknowledge it and keep the journey, because it comes at the cost of the need for external validation, which is somehow primal in the human condition. And this finally to us explain, oh, this is why you get so few people being able to answer, what's the talk you're trying to walk? This is why we have so few organizations where their values are genuinely congruent, the published values, as to what we see in senior leaders. It's a lack of maturity and self-awareness and understanding and vertical development in the leaders. And it's technically impossible to achieve that congruence until they learn how to examine. They learn the self-examined mind stage. You can throw them values PR exercises and courses on values and how wonderful values are until you're blue in the face. It's not going to change, because the fundamental operating system is still the need for external validation. That has to be seen and challenged, and it's quite an extraordinary growth part. Okay, so those are, just a reminder, those are the 3 test questions, right? What's your talk? So if you're watching this webinar and you're interested in evolving yourself, this is what you want to look at. You want to ask yourself these questions. What's the talk you want to walk as a leader? Now, fascinatingly enough, even when you're asking that, if you're subject to the need for external validation, socialized mind's not aware. The key thing is, whatever you're subject to, whatever you're ruled by definition, you're not really aware of it, right? So I was working with a CEO this morning, and we were talking about how he avoids dealing with things on time. And so I asked him this simple question. I said, like, what is the monster? I didn't use these exact words, but what's the discomfort you're running from in yourself? Like the monster you don't want to know about, right? And that causes you to do all this conflict avoidance. And he said, oh, I don't really know. And then within like a heartbeat, he was talking about his staff again. And he talked about 3 minutes, and then I stopped him and I said, what just happened now? And eventually he was able to get, oh, I've kind of distracted from the topic, haven't I? I haven't been able to look. Yes, you've distracted. Do you recall the moment when you decided to distract? I asked him. No. I said, it's like you're in a trance, isn't it? It's like you're kind of just like doing the distraction. And it's the very problem, because you distract around instead of dealing with stuff on time. And you're not even aware you're in the problem when you're just in a trance. And this is the challenge with socialized mind. Socialized mind doesn't know they're in socialized mind. They're just in it. It's like a fish trying to look for water. So often when we ask people, what's the talk you're trying to walk as a leader, they answer it from a socialized mind perspective, and they're not even aware of it. So they ask themselves, what talk would sound good? if I could express my talk, would that impress people? Would I look as a good? And all of these questions, they're not even aware that they're orienting themselves on the very question from an external validation perspective. And again, this is where self-awareness becomes so critical. If we really are to get congruent cultures, we need that first R right, the role modeling of leaders. So in summary, when we look at getting a culture to really be congruent with its stated values to achieve the strategy and so forth, we tend to look at horizontal skills and vertical growth as two different things. Horizontal skills are adding skills. So imagine I've talked about socialized mind. It's like, let's say we teach the socialized mind to how to empower people more, how to collaborate with people more, how to praise people more. And then we don't give them any vertical skills. What we found in practice is that leadership development, for example, is not rocket science. It's like, it's kind of boring. Pick up the latest leadership development book or leadership book. It's like, it's the same thing that's been said for the last 100 years over and over. Empower your people, appreciate your people, have a learner mindset, like have a vision, have a set of values. It's like yawn. So we know the skills. Now, sometimes people still need to be taught the skills, but the challenge is this. If you, for example, are taught empowerment skills, and yet you still have a socialized mind that needs to be the shiniest star in the team. Let's say you're a leader, and part of your external validation is always being the smartest person in the room. That's part of your unconscious need. You get taught empowerment skills. Your need for external validation by being the smartest in the room will constantly hijack the skills you've learned. And how do you deal with that? That's vertical growth. Vertical growth is where we learn the self-awareness, personal accountability, and deep inner values alignment, that we can interrupt the socialized mind pattern. And then we can actually finally use these skills that we're taught to empower people, to collaborate, so forth, with real skill and real flexibility. But without that self-awareness, that sense of I'm the one authoring my behaviors, I'm the one in alignment with values, that self-examine stage, it becomes very hit and miss and fraught and really poorly done usually when we teach people skills. And this is why we think that vertical growth is going to become basically the number one thing in leadership development over the next decade, 2 decades, because most of our clients are frustrated with, to quote one of our clients, we've spent millions of dollars, they said, on teaching feedback skills, millions of dollars and the culture hasn't changed at all. And it's like, well, yeah, because you've not done vertical growth. Most people have got an unconscious paradigm of teach me a way to give a person feedback that I still have my need for external validation perfectly intact, and I don't have to deal with any uncomfortable feelings. And then they discover that actually you can't really get around that. No one really wants to talk about that. And then the skills don't really get utilized because they presented on a false promise. And that's the problem with just presenting horizontal skills to people.
Hey, Michael, just quick one, a great question here. Are self-examining minds governed by their own values rather than organizational values anyway? So who meets the organizational values?
Yeah. So Lisa, what we found is, this is probably it's a great question, as you rightly said, Julian, and it's one of the trickiest parts of our work. I'm just looking at the time because I need to wrap up, is, and I'm going to go a few minutes extra, I'm going to have to. What we find is that we've never, ever had a situation, I'm going to have to answer this really simply, unfortunately. If you ever want to have a deeper conversation, just reach out. What we find is that we've never had a situation where a person living their personal values, and they are well-chosen values, like proper virtues values, ever conflicts with the organization's stated values. It just doesn't happen. In fact, what they start seeing is that in the context of living their own values, they actually support and enhance the organization's stated values, not necessarily the behaviors they're seeing. And that's an important connection. We've never seen that disconnection. And it's important to make that connection. I can't say more than that, except that the two actually support each other very well. If you teach people vertical growth, where they have the self-awareness ability plus the skills, then you put basic behavior science in place. You have prompts, rituals, and support and accountability over time. Then you actually get the desired leaders, team, and organizational culture. We find if you have any of these three, vertical growth, horizontal skills, or the process, the rituals and process over time, your chances of getting consciously and deliberately to an amazing culture, it's just not going to happen. You're constantly going to be fumbling around. So in summary, the 3 culture levers are the 3 R's: role modeling of leaders, rituals and rewards, and accountability. To successfully and consistently role model values, leaders must have a talk that they can express. They must take accountability for they are the culture. And then to support honesty, accountability, and psychological safety, leaders must be vertically growth-minded, right? To be open to feedback. I haven't covered that, but what we find is at the self-examine stage, there's a huge curiosity on what I'm doing and a huge humility at the same time that I am a work in progress. And that's where you, by default, when people go into that stage, there's tremendous amount of psychological safety that's developed because there's no longer defending the image for the purposes of external validation. The irony is when we defend our image for the purposes of external validation, we actually get the opposite of validation and we lose credibility. At the self-examine stage, there's a much more mature understanding that I am a work in progress on my values. Please tell me if I'm not living my values, because I know I can go blind into that trance that I talked about earlier at times, and it's wonderful getting a wake-up call from you guys. Oh, I was out of line with my values. Thank you so much. There's this maturity and humility, and then you get the R of role modeling right. Okay. If any of you want to understand this more in your own context, Julian's also putting the link in there if you want, if you don't have a phone. If you want to understand this more in your own context, looking at your own initiatives where you might be disconnected from various areas, from your strategy through to your vision, through to your learning and development strategies, growth, and so forth, we'd be very happy to question and support you, no questions asked, just to help you at least get your head around how this works in your context. Okay, and final questions. All right, so for those of you who need to run, and I'm just respecting your time, thank you so much for attending, and I'm going to hang back for a few minutes of extra questions. Thank you. Thanks, Susan. Okay, Jennifer. NZ has a higher rate of bullying than many other countries. What culture should be developing to reduce the incidence of bullying and harassment? Oh gosh, Jennifer, I would say, again, these are wonderful, complex questions. The simplest answer is we have to develop accountability for, just think about the behavior standard again. Clarity of the behavior standard is the beginning. Then it's to get everyone in the system to be accountable for what's happening. So another way of saying it is that if I'm in a bullying culture, both bullies themselves and the bullied are both accountable, shifting behaviors. Of course, you want to protect the bully, but they usually are unwittingly complicit, like they allow it, they don't call it out. There's things that they have agency over, that they have empowerment. They need to be taught those and supported on those. And then if the bullying is coming from the senior leadership, we have this rule of thumb I'm giving you organizational context, not a whole societal, that's all. If we get into the societal thing, we're going to have to talk about trauma and psychological trauma, and that's a whole other discussion, which I love and I've studied and I'm fascinated by, but it's not really contextually right here, we can't have that discussion. But organizationally, we always ask when we work with CEOs, which we usually do with organizations, we ask the CEO, are you willing to fire a person who's a high performer and a poor behavior? They're not giving you the right values. And that's our acid test. So if a client tells us, if a CEO in all honesty says, I can't really say a word, then we usually disqualify ourselves from working with that client. Because at the bottom line is there has to be accountability. If there's no bottom line on the behaviors you want, then there's no bottom line. In other words, there is no standard. So that's how we start. And we need to help our clients fall in love with the values, the deep meaning, the potential that they present. Then the accountability and role modeling around those we found is what works over time. All right, 5 new messages. Just thank you. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Any other questions? No. Jennifer, I would also say, by the way, that higher rates of bullying indicates higher levels of trauma in the society as well. As you know, bullies are usually bullied when they're young. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying, those of you who stayed, and wishing you a lovely, values-aligned, mindful day.
Thank you, everyone.